What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Carpool Gaming for episode 2 of our Last of Us miniseries dedicated to the wonderful HBO show that is currently airing. Last night we saw Infected, which is the title for episode 2. My name's Matt, and I'll be your host as we talk all things Infected. I'm joined, of course, by the incredible $2 hero himself. What's up, Seth? How you doing?
Hey, buddy. For some reason, I just wanted to be like, bomb. After this episode.
I know, right? We'll get into the spoilers and the nitty gritty in just a little bit. But before we do that, Seth, hit me with your spoiler-free impressions before we really dig into it. What did you think of episode 2? How did you think it compared to episode 1? What did you think?
I really liked it. First of all, hashtag Matt was right. If you go back and listen to last week's post show, Matt was pretty much dead on with how this one was going to play out, and I really liked it. I thought what's interesting, and without getting into spoilers yet, it's really interesting to see how much of a deviation they've taken from the games. Whereas I felt like episode 1 was more or less to the point where there's one for one shots from the game, and there's some of that in this too, but like we are starting to actually see some pretty major deviation from the games in this one, and that's very exciting to me. It was cool to see a little bit more of Ellie in this episode and kind of like get to see her kind of come into her own a little bit. I really liked seeing more Tess in this. This is kind of like a little bit of a Tess-centric episode. The way that the way that the clickers, like we were finally starting to see the clickers like in live action, and the tension in those scenes. The episode's directed by Neil Druckmann, so like that's a really cool like kind of to get to see the way that he literally frames his own world in live action was really cool. But yeah, the stuff I'm really excited to talk about though are spoilers, and even just the way that the show opens. This episode opens kind of in a similar way to the first episode, and we're getting like just more fat to chew on, just more backstory, more context, and it's exactly what I want to see from this show. I'm really excited about it.
I'm 100% with you, dude. I love that they're using the cold opens in a way that I don't think I was expecting. Like, we knew, again, without getting into spoilers, but we knew that we would see parts of the world before, like leading up to and into Outbreak Day. But I love that they're using the cold opens to kind of help build out the world, build out the things that, like, again, they may have wanted to show more of in the game, but they just, again, given tech limitations and what they were doing at the time, they couldn't have. This really does feel like The Last of Us, just bigger. It feels more fleshed out, which is, again, given how fleshed out the original game already is just a testament to the way that they're putting the show together. I loved, Bella Ramsey as Ellie is just pitch perfect. Even like we talked about this last week, but like some of her delivery feels and sounds exactly like Ellie, exactly like Ashley Johnson, to like the way that she delivers the lines, to like the inflection in her voice feels spot on. Pedro Pascal as Joel just continues to be fantastic. Anna as, Tess is also, like, this cast is just fantastic, considering it was pretty much just the three of them all episode. Essentially, they carried it all. And like you mentioned, like, the clickers, pitch perfect, like just so entirely on. Like, I love that they're using the same actors and actresses that portrayed the clickers and the infected in the game. I'm glad that they've brought them back for the show, just because, again, the movements, the way that they shuffle their feet, the way that they kind of awkwardly kind of move around is just so perfect. And like, again, as someone who's played the games, and actually I went and re-downloaded The Last of Us Part 1 this morning, because like
and everyone else, dude.
I'm telling you, right? Like, I just keep seeing people talking about, playing through the chapters of the game alongside the show, and I think I'm going to start doing that, where every week, like, depending on what happens in the show, I'll kind of play until that point. I just think it's a really cool idea. Maybe I'll go for the platinum. But just like, it's just so good, dude. Everything just hits. And for them to, like, I'm on board with 99% of the changes. There was one thing at the end of this episode, which I know we'll get into, that did bother me, but every other change that they've made, and especially because, like, talking about, the spores versus the tendrils were sold to me in this episode 100% as to why they make sense. And just they're just hitting on all cylinders. And I'm Neil Druckmann, his first time out directing, outside of gaming, fantastic. He crushed it. I know some people had an
Killed it.
issue with a bit of like the shaky cam. I thought it worked really, really well. Like I feel like it
Hmm.
just kind of matched. But yeah, I loved this episode. I thought it was fantastic. And evidently, like, slight spoilers, but like, and again, I'm not going to give anything away here, but a lot of the people who have watched the entire series keep talking about how incredible episode 3 is. And we'll get into what we think that episode is going to be, but like there's just so much hype around episode 3 specifically, given that we're going back to another hour and 20 long episode. We'll talk more about this, but
Right.
I cannot wait for next week. It's been a while, dude, that we've had a show that just completely captures the zeitgeist of the moment. Like, it's been a while since everybody's been on Twitter right after an episode aired being like, oh my God, this episode, this happened and this, and then in your reactions. It's been a while since we've had just that collective euphoria almost for a product. And it's so awesome to have that again.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. And I'm with you on being sold on the tendrils. Like I was kind of, neither here nor there on it when it started last week. You're kind of like, yeah, like we'll see. But yeah, I'm right there with you. This episode sold me on it. This episode was when I was like, yeah, like there's narrative justification for it. It makes sense, especially, and I want to encourage people, when the credits start rolling, keep watching. There's a little bit of like kind of behind the scenes stuff after the credits that is a must watch. And like it's so cool. Like I love that they do that.
Mhm.
So keep watching after the credits roll.
Keep watching after the credits roll. But without further ado, let's get into the spoilers because I know you and I are itching to talk about some of the finer details
Yes.
here. So, official spoiler warning: we're going to start spoiling the entirety of episode 2, Infected, of The Last of Us. So here's your final warning in 3, 2, 1. You know what? Let's kick things off from the jump. We kicked off the episode, with Ellie, Tess, and Joel as they're heading out, of the QZ into the infected zones, and like will say that off the jump, I think something that did bug me was the CG. There were certain
Mm.
moments when, and it's not when we just see the environment. There are certain scenes when we see the characters interacting environment, specifically one where they're like, when they're walking up to, was it the museum, or like they're walking up to something, and like them walking through the environment looked not great. And like there was a couple moments there
Mm.
where I really took me out of it because of how awkward the CG looked. And I don't know, did you notice that? Like, was that something that bothered you as well?
Not really.
Okay.
I can see a little bit of what you're talking about. There's definitely there's a little bit of like juxtaposition between like what is real and what is like a little left of center.
Yeah.
Like you can kind of tell what is a set and what's not a set,
Yeah.
right? A little bit. I wouldn't say that it bothered me, but I picked up on it a little bit. It was funny. I was watching the show with my wife, and she was like, "Man, like this is all so beautiful, just the way nature is like retaking the world." She's like, "I wish real life was like this." She's like,
Yeah, no,
so.
yeah, I feel, yeah. Like, I think the set design and everything is beautiful. There was just a couple moments there that
Mhm.
took me out of the experience a little bit, but I have to say, dude, even as somebody like, who's played the games, I know where the show is going. I was on the
Right.
edge of my seat the entire time because essentially what we get, is the lead up to in our first encounter with the clickers. And like I know some people, were comparing it to Jurassic Park, right? Like the certain scenes
A
there,
little bit.
and
Yeah.
like just I thought they nailed the tension, the design, and just how like like horrifying that entire scenario was. They rocked it. I thought that scene was perfect.
It's great. I love like the actual like the practical prosthetic effects on the
Yes.
clickers are beautiful.
Yeah.
Like I love the way they're represented, as you mentioned, like having the actors kind of portraying them absolutely perfect.
Hmm.
Like they're like no notes. It's perfect. The way they have handled the clickers is perfect. And yeah, like the tension of the scene, this kind of like um they've conveyed the vibe that it has in the game, which is I'm sneaking around and eventually something's gonna pop off.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be a scramble and I have to survive and they're hard to put down. Like they have very, very accurately captured what it's like in the game, which is great.
Yeah, no, I'm entirely with you. I think that they completely nailed that. Just because, again, like, I love that, again, like that because that encounter in the game, you do come across like two or three of them, right? And similar
Yep.
here, it wasn't just one that they came across that was like
Yep.
ridiculous. And even some of the call outs earlier on in the episode when, Ellie was like, I heard there are some that like, explode and there are spores everywhere. And they both kind of like laugh it off. I'm like, oh, they're already teasing a bloater. And then they make the
Yeah.
call right to the, to clicker and, Tess and Joel go silent, right? Like they're like, oh, that one's not as funny. Like there's
Hmm.
just so many of these pieces that are just like I love that they're setting stuff up. And like I do wonder if we're gonna go full board with the infected the way that we did in the game. So obviously because of the boss battles, if we're gonna get like the giant hulking infected and stuff like that. But I just thought that entire showdown with the clickers was just it was perfect. And like I guess we'll pull in the tendrils here because I think like we both mentioned, they sold us here. The
Yeah.
fact that if they step on them at the wrong time, the essential like entire network of infected around them just get notified and just start swarming. Like I can't even imagine because I started thinking about this a lot last night with them using tendrils versus the spores. I don't think the spores would have been as visually interesting in the show as they would have been in the game. Like I think the
Totally.
game is a great use of like here are particle effects. Here's this very like weird environment that you get to move through. In the show, I don't know if it would have hit the same way because I feel like it would have been pretty reliant on CGI. And now with the tendrils, like can you imagine trying to animate that in a video game? Like proper foot positioning so you don't step on stuff or you do
Right.
step on stuff. This just heightens the tension in such a palpable way that like again, one wrong step can make all the difference. And I thought they nailed that.
I love that. So, and it's funny because I picked up on little tiny things like Druckmann would bring the camera down to the feet a
Yes.
lot,
Yeah.
like a lot, like because Tess makes that line that in any other situation would just be a throwaway line,
Mhm.
right? That would just be, yeah, like you step on a patch of this stuff and all of a sudden you've triggered 1,000 of them a mile away or
Yeah.
whatever. And to me, that's so cool. Like this notion that they really are a hive mind, and you get that shot of them down on the street level where there's just dozens of them just operating in tandem together.
Yep.
And it's paid off, obviously, at the end of the episode of just like, yeah, no, these things really are connected. And I think that is so cool. And I think and honestly, I had forgotten until they played that kind of behind the scenes thing that the tension before this was actually just like the government or the
Yes.
military sort of
Yep.
thing following them. And I'm like, oh right, that is what it was. This is way better.
I know.
Like
100%, like just because because then the whole thing with the spores is always like they were very like localized environments where the spores were an issue where
yeah.
they were kind of isolated, there wasn't a lot of air in and out. This allows them to put those tendrils almost anywhere and it become a fundamental issue that they have to deal with immediately.
Hmm.
And even like like that entire like walk up the stairs when they're heading before they encounter with the
Yes.
clicker again was just so tense because A, they were trying to be silent, and B, like it was even in the moment where like everything comes down on them when they're going through that doorway and Ellie and Tess kind of fall through it. Neither one of them screamed, neither one of them made a sound. Like the
Right.
commitment to the silence on top of dealing with the tendrils on top of moving through the environment is just such a perfect trifecta of just unbelievable tension.
Well, and not only that, I think a lot of people were worried when we were moving away from spores that we would move away from environmental tension
Right.
too. And we're not
Nope.
because like it creates these cool moments where Joel is like investigating. He's like, no, this is dry. Like we're good or whatever. And I'm like, so you're still getting that. Like you're
Yeah.
still getting the exact same function that the spores had are still happening with the tendrils. They're kind of having their cake and eating it too.
Yeah, and I
So
have to say like that was just a brilliant way to like again to build that environmental tension back into it. And I think I kind of want to pivot because I want to go back to that cold open
oh,
because oh my god, what an
so good.
absolutely harrowing, like heartbreaking, mortifying scene, and like the actors and actresses involved were just spot on. Like I just chills the entire time through that
Yeah.
scene. So hit me with your thoughts on the cold open.
It's beautiful. Like yeah, it's chilling and it's harrowing and this sort of like and it's quiet, which I
Yes.
thought was really nice. Like it opens up and they bring in this woman who is an expert on the cordyceps and
Yeah,
and the fungi and
she was a
stuff.
university professor of mycology in Jakarta.
Right. Right. So, and yeah, and I love that it opens up in Jakarta. So we're kind of getting this is my favorite thing about watching shows week to week and like speculating between weeks, because we're all like doing the flower theories and
Yep, the
stuff like
bread.
this, and exactly, and they like tap into that basically right away. Like it's almost like they knew that
Exactly.
people were going to be speculating on this. So they open up straight away, Jakarta, let's tackle this.
Yep.
And there is reference made to like the flower factory and things like this, and
Hmm.
that is kind of where the outbreak happened. But it's so harrowing, like the way that it builds that tension quietly, and they bring her in and they're like, hey, like look at this slide. She says, oh yeah, this is cordyceps or whatever, but I don't understand why you prepared the slide this way.
Yep.
They're like, well, this is how we prepare it for human samples, but they don't survive in humans. Well, yeah, they do. And oh man, it was so good. And like just her, I don't know the actress's name, but the woman who played the professor, dude, she just it was such a powerful performance. The realization on her face of just like, look, I've been researching these for, decades, for basically my entire life. There's no medicine, there's no vaccine, there's no cure. Like the only solution, and he's like, so like, what do we do? And she just says, bomb this city and
Dude.
everyone in it.
Oh.
And just like, oh, the heartbreak on her face, the weight of what she's saying, but she knows that is truly the only thing that can help this situation. Oh my god, it was perfect.
I'm just trying to look up the actress's name. Uh,
Yeah,
because I don't want to. Christine Hakim, I believe is her name, according to one of these bylines here. But yeah, dude, that entire buildup,
so
like,
good.
I love that you mentioned that because that was at the top of my mind too. Is that like immediately the flour bread theory immediately paid off. There was no
Yeah.
multi-week buildup. Like they were like, we dropped a bunch of hints throughout the first episode, and here is the immediate payoff. And like as you mentioned, just from the point of her introduction to her that final scene of her on the couch realizing how absolutely screwed that they were, because again,
Yeah.
for somebody like that to be like, kill everyone, like myself, my family, everyone, like
Yes.
eliminate all of us, because that is the only hope to prevent this from spreading across the world. Because even like, the fact that she was like, how many more people are missing? There are 14 other people from that factory who are still not accounted for. That is enough that
Yep.
spread is going to happen fast, and it's going to happen hard. And just her realization and the delivery of just the utter shock and horror. You see her face change throughout the like that entire conversation to just utter hopelessness. And it's just, they nailed that. And I hope that we continue to get these cold opens to flash back to, immediately up to and including outbreak day, just because
Yeah.
it's so disturbing. And again, like, I also watched it with my wife, and like we finished the episode and she was like, I don't want to go to sleep now. Why does it feel like this can actually happen? Right? Like this,
Yeah.
like this is a realm
Feels
of,
real.
exactly, this is a
Yeah.
realm of zombie outbreak that isn't far off. It is somewhat based on some version of a reality. There's a timeline of this that is a feasible possibility, right? Like, and that's what makes this entire situation even more, absolutely horrifying, is because it's not that far out from the reality that we live in. It's not some random virus that, that pops out of nowhere. This is like a thing found and then, deviated and mutated based on the world that we created with, climate change and everything else. It's, oh god, it's so it just chills, like,
The breathtaking scene.
a hundred
Yeah.
percent. And then obviously we build up over the course of the episode where we run to the clickers, and like, we start to hear a mention of Bill and Frank. We see Tess starting to freak out. We see much more of Ellie. And again, I just have to give the biggest kudos to Bella Ramsey and her delivery of those lines, because like, even when at the beginning of the episode when they're, she's just waking up and they're talking about what to do with her, and she does her whole little, turning
Oh,
thing.
so
It's
good.
just
Yeah.
100% Ellie. I laughed so many times at her delivery to the lines, and even just like the commitment to like the little Easter eggs from the game. Her not being able to swim, and I was
Yep.
100% ready to see like a raft or like a skid that they
Pulling
were
her
gonna pull
around.
over. Exactly. And then Joel
Yeah.
just gets in and it's like knee deep. Incredible.
Yeah.
him, boosting Tess up, and then us just sitting there waiting for her to turn around and like get
Yeah,
back to the door, and like her being like, Joel, like you can put the gun down. Like there's so much
right.
familiarity, not just between the characters, but also them looking at us, some people who have played the game and be like, you see what we're doing here? Without
Yes.
it being feeling cheap or egregious or weird. Like, what did you think about
Yeah.
those connections?
It does, and yeah, it doesn't feel pandering. Like
No.
even though like it's not like it's not nudging you and being like, see, like we're really doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely like it feels genuine. Like it comes from a genuine place. And even like because there are still scenes that are ripped straight from the game.
Yes.
Like the scene with her kind of interacting with in the hotel, like oh, you take my luggage
Yeah.
right this way. So, like stuff like that. That's right from the game. And like the classic shot of them standing and like looking over the horizon,
Mm-hmm.
again straight from the game, but it definitely has like a different connotation this time, where in this one, like they make it really obvious. Like Joel takes that really obvious look,
Mm-hmm.
at the watch and everything, and like I don't know, it just has like they've just taken it and just twisted it a little bit, which is like perfect to me. Just like, how do we take this, make it faithful to the source, but also make it faithful to what we're doing here that is new? And that's what like all of it is, and it's great.
I know. I want to circle back around to that shot as well of he looks at her when they're kind of looking at the state
Mm-hmm.
building for the first time, because that is a huge moment in the game, and that's a lot of people's favorite
Iconic.
scenes, because like I know how much that scene especially means to Court, right? So
Yeah.
for me, like I know he mentioned that he was a little bit disappointed with the way that scene came out, just because especially after just playing part 1, you can see how much he falls for her in that moment, and that's the beginning, that's that catalyst of him starting to look at her and being like, maybe I care about you a little bit, a
Right.
little bit. You see that in the game, it's on his face. And this one, I still think that same message is delivered. It's a little bit different, because like in the trailers, that glance looks pretty quick. If you rewatch that scene, he's looking at her for a couple seconds before the camera shifts, so you still see that moment in him. And I think, like you mentioned, instead of it being all over his face, because this Joel seems a little bit more hardened at this point than our Joel was in the game.
Totally.
um and again, like even Tess like says, like we're not good people. Like they're very much being like, these two are survivors first. They are good people in there, and if they hadn't gone through everything that they went through, maybe they would be different. But you see him look, and you see him starting to change, and then again, that brief like look down at his watch, you can start to see that same catalyst, it was still in that same moment. It
Yep.
just, I don't know if it was as heavy as it was in the games. It's just, I think this is still the beginning of him starting to look at her a little
Yeah.
bit differently, more than just
That
cargo.
Totally. That is this show's version of that.
Yes.
Right. That is where their relationship is in this show. That is him saying, like, looking down at the watch, and because that tells the viewer, he made, for even the briefest moment, he made the connective tissue in his
Exactly.
mind to Sarah.
Yep.
Right. So like that's exactly why he looked down at it. And like, yeah, to me that's just they're conveying like a similar message. They're just doing it a different way, which is to me like totally indicative of this entire show. Let's tackle the same story and the same vibes, but let's do it a different way, a little bit of a deeper way. I even love something that I wanted to make sure we mentioned was the little stuff that happens in dialogue, the little kind of context that's added in dialogue, the little ways that, because I really thought, and I talked about this last week on the show, I really thought that this was going to be the Riley episode, the Left Behind
Hmm.
kind of flashback episode. And there were a couple points where I thought that was where we were going.
Yep.
When they were walking on the bridge together, and Tess is kind of learning a little bit more about Ellie. She's like, "Is anybody going to come looking for you, mom, dad, boyfriend?"
Yep.
And Ellie's like, "I'm an orphan, and no."
Yep.
you know,
Yeah.
and and I thought that was for sure when we were, and she even asks about like the mall and like how she survived. Were you there alone? And she
Yep.
says she was. So I thought for sure that was when we were going to flash back, and it was then going to become the Left Behind episode.
Yep.
But that's not what happened. It's interesting. They're making us like, they're giving us these little morsels, and like they're making us, I feel like, even hungrier for the full meal. You know what I mean?
And that's kind of where I was at last week when we were talking about that, because I do think that there was a very, like, I think you and Court made a very viable argument there. For me, I think what the play here is similar to the play in the game, because they
Hmm.
make you fall in love with Ellie as she is now. And then when you finally learn what happened to her, when you learn about Riley, those emotional gut punches are amplified, because I feel like if you did that earlier on in the show, they make you fall in love with her based on her history, right? And then everything that
Right.
happens after is what happens after. For them to put you in the moment now and say, okay, here are your reasons to care about this character as they are in front of you, and then turn around and say, hey, this is what happened to her, makes those emotional gut punches 100 times worse, because you're already built to care. You're not being told to care. You're being said, you're now being shown this is what happened. So that's why I was of the mind, and why I think the entire thing was slot in the winter section of the game to begin with, was because the emotional payoff is greater once you have a bigger connection to the character. You don't
Yeah.
need to know that stuff now, because it will become that much more important when we get our full Ellie episode in winter. And that's when I still think that's when we get Left Behind. But they're starting to build that now already, with the mention of Riley in the first episode, the entire conversation that you just talked about. That's why I was kind of like, for me, Tess dying in this episode makes perfect sense. And I think that's kind of like where, we'll kind of carry the conversation next, is that finale, is that showdown, because I'm of two minds of it. And I think like they almost nailed it, and then they kind of didn't right at the final moment, because I have no issue with them making the change from Fedra to the infected in that moment. I think that change makes
Yeah.
a ton of sense for them, for the Fireflies, to if somebody who's gotten infected in their way over, and then it's a showdown between, the infected Fireflies and they not. And like, I mean, Joel says that everybody lost, right? For instead of Fedra to be sending out, a whole unit of people way out there, outside of the quarantine zone to chase
Right.
down a couple Fireflies, like it made for a great action sequence of the game, because that's your first time dealing with human enemies. But in the context of the show, it makes a lot more sense for it to be the infected. I think where my issue starts to come in is you start to see Tess, like that whole moment when they finally realize, with her iconic line of, our luck was always going to run out at some point,
Yeah.
is just, it was pitch perfect. And then you see her toss the grenades on the floor. You see her start to dump all the gas and the oil or whatever else it was all over the floor. And her start to, like, because in my mind, her sacrifice in the game is her going down swinging. You know what I mean? It's Tess. It's her literally like, having the last laugh in that moment, because she's the one that starts to take, the Fedra agents down. She goes down under her terms, even though she was infected. And I feel like that moment is a bit lost in the show, just because, again, you start to see that setup. She's holding the gun. There are grenades all over the floor. And instead of her, shooting a grenade, instead of her, throwing a grenade, she gets just like paralyzed by fear in that moment as she's trying to light the lighter. And that weird, because it wasn't a kiss, I know that's the running joke, but like there was no like romantic or sexual connotation there whatsoever. And I know some people are saying they sexualized that scene. That's not what it was. That was, I think, some people have already pointed out that like Tess in the show is much more afraid of infected, and that's been alluded to multiple times over the course of the 2 episodes. But like, I would have much rathered her, shoot the grenade, toss a grenade, do something so that she goes down swinging. And I mean, she ultimately does that as she's trying not to, cause a whole scene of, before she lights the lighter. I just think that there was something lost in that moment that was so special to her, her sacrifice in the game, that just ultimately didn't connect with me in her very final moments there. But I don't know, Seth, what did you think about that final showdown?
I loved it, and I actually I went back and watched this scene in the game after, because my wife was like, "Is this how this happens in the game?" I'm like, "No, not at all."
Hmm.
So we went back and rewatched the scene, and for me, to be honest with you, if she had like shot the grenade, that to me would have come off as a little cartoonish. Like, she's not John Wick,
Yeah,
you know what I
sure.
mean? Like, if she had like shot the grenade, that would have been a little weird. What to me, what the scene was she realized in that moment that finally she has the opportunity to do something good.
Hmm.
Like, finally she has the opportunity for something to go right, for something to take control of a situation. And you know what? My last act, now that I know that I'm infected, now that I have the confirmation in my
Hmm.
own mind that this is real, Joel,
Yep.
now it's time to take the reins and do something good with a little bit of time I have left.
Yep.
You know, and for that moment to happen where she's made that decision in her mind and she's trying to light the lighter and it's not coming, that look on her face is just like, oh my god, I can't even do this. You
Right.
know,
Okay.
is the vibe there. And when and what's interesting too is in that moment of dialogue there, and we talked about this in the first episode, and it was kind of nice to have that validated in this one. You get it's real quick.
Yep.
She says, Joel, like, I never asked you to feel the way I feel.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, so clearly there was some kind of something there between them, and she had deeper feelings, and Joel just didn't. Joel just couldn't get there.
Yep.
You know? So clearly there was something like that going on, and all of that, the weight of all of that is clearly on her. And I think that while it wasn't a kiss, the moment at the end of the infected coming by to, because they already know she's infected.
Exactly.
That's why they didn't go after her.
Yeah.
They already know the virus is in there,
Yep.
right? So they're basically just, it's like a mama bird feeding, her young or something is what that was. But like it looks like a kiss because I think that it's like a visual representation of Tess, who is somebody who wants to do good, is somebody who wants love in this hellscape, but can't get it. And hasn't been able to make that happen for herself. Finally, she has a moment to take the reins in a way that she can't do with Joel, in a way that she can't do in, with anything that's going on.
Right.
Finally she can. And that was what I really liked about that scene.
I like that interpretation because I do think that is a different spin on it, and perhaps a little bit more with what they were intending. I think it was just, for me, like, it's just, there was a bit of a disconnect there with the execution of it, or at least the way that I perhaps expected Tess to go down. Because I do think it worked given the context of the show. I still would have preferred it to go down a little bit differently, but I really like the way that you looked at that because, again, you could see why they did what they did. And why she went down the way that she did. Because again, now we're in full, we're out, right? Like this is we're out of Midgar, out of the Final Fantasy VII, right? Like we're going full board into what the story needs to be now. And I think let's hop into a question that we got before we kind of start theorizing about next week, because we got Nakachaka over in the Discord asked, episode 1 cold opening started with the talk show, and episode 2 started off with more insight as to how things started in Indonesia. What are you guys hoping to see in episode 3's cold opening if they continue with this format? Because, like, they even use the cold opening in the second episode where, like, as we mentioned, like, the professors, like, start bombing. And then later in the episode, we see the craters, and they're like, Ellie, was this because of the bombs? And, Tess confirms that, right? So you start to see that these things were directly tied to what we were shown and told before. So what would you want out of episode 3's cold open? What do you want to see from the world before or through those, kind of final moments of normality?
What's funny is I'm sure that they're going to continue this trend. And I love it. I've loved it in both episodes so far. But like, this is actually the thing where I don't know what they're going to do, and that's what excites me about it.
Yes.
Like, I don't know where they're going to go with it or what they're going to show me, and that is what makes it, like, I kind of hope that I'm not able to predict what they're going to show me, like, because last week I wouldn't have predicted that this week's episode was going to open the way it did.
Yep.
And so, like, I actually don't want to know what they're, or even have an inkling of what they're going to do, because if I sat here and said, like, oh yeah, maybe they'll show us, the actual moment in the flower factory or whatever,
True.
whatever, that would be cool. But like, what's going to be way more interesting is seeing whatever it is they're actually going to show us. It's going to be something left of center, something we're not expecting, something that is going to provide more context from the time before. But I don't think we're going to be able to predict it.
I'm with you because, like, I think, because, like, I was thinking about this since Nagachaka's question came in, and I feel like, the first cold opening took us way back to the past, to like the very theory of how this could happen. The second episode showed us the beginnings of it happening. And I think over the course of the next few episodes, I think we're going to get a couple different perspectives. One of which being, I think we're going to continue to move forward in time as these things happen. So we're getting the initial, the start of something here. And I feel like what we're going to see next episode is potentially the beginning of the infection, whether they're going to stay in Jakarta or not. Like, because again, in the first episode, we heard, the news clip of, a lot of unrest in Jakarta, right? So I think we're going to start to see the beginning of the outbreak in there,
Mm-hmm.
possibly. Or what we're going to start to see is, again, I think the government reaction is going to be a must, whether that's in Indonesia, whether that's back in the States or wherever else. I think we're going to get that scene of, like, the higher ups, the presidents or whatever, having a conversation of, like, what do we need to do here? Are we going to fire
Right.
these bombs? Are we, like, I think there is a bit of like a connective tissue between the opening scenes. And I think what we're going to start to see is, like, the fallout of that flower. Are we going to start to see the beginnings of the infection in London or in Brazil? I think we're going to start to see the beginnings of that, because in my mind, I don't see these jumping around in time of, like, I don't think we're going to go back to the 1970s again, or we're going to go back to before, seeing the beginnings of the flower thing, because that's established. I think what we're going to start to see is the beginning of the panic, the beginning of the decline. And I think what we'll see over the course of the next, 7 episodes is that, like, I think, like, what we'll finally get in episode 9 would be, in my mind, is the full outbreak day from a different perspective rather than Joel's perspective. So I think that's what we're going to start to see with the cold openings, is just
Yeah.
everybody else's reaction, because I don't want to see the cold openings. I don't want to see Joel and Ellie in the cold opens. That is one thing I don't
Right.
want to see,
Me either. I
unless
don't either.
the one time I'll kind of make an exception to that rule would be the Ellie episode. If the beginning of the Ellie episode, the cold open is her starting to, like, set the things up, and then the entirety rest of the episode is left behind. So I think that would be
Or yeah. Yeah. Well, and maybe that's where we get Ashley Johnson as Ellie's mom. Is in a
exactly,
cold
yeah.
open or something. Yeah. And when you were talking about, I like the idea of there being, like, what's going on in all these different places in London, whatever. And it made me think of there's a character, I think his name's like Ish or something,
Yes,
in
yes, yes, yes,
leaving
yes.
the notes.
Yeah,
It'd be kind of cool if we got that in
that
the
would be
cold
sick.
open.
Yeah,
Yeah, if we got some of that in the cold open, that'd be kind of cool. And that would make sense, because you would get, like, a little bit of that connective tissue and a little bit of that extra, like, flavor there in the, opening 5-10 minutes or whatever. It doesn't have to take away its a little side story. And it
exactly.
would also give you a look at a different perspective without it being Joel and Ellie. That would be kind of cool.
So that, yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking and hoping. But let's round out the episode, my dude, by talking about where we think episode 3 is going, because again, a lot of the hullabaloo on Twitter and a lot of the people who are saying that, they've seen the whole season, they've watched every episode multiple times except for episode 3, because of how
Mm,
good, how powerful, and how, emotionally, how emotional the episode is. That's kind of like the general vibe going into next week. And with the setup being Bill and Frank, what I wonder, and again, episode 3 being the final longer episode that we know of, because from the runtimes that have been revealed, the next few following will be under around the same episode of the same length as
yeah.
episode 2. So episode 3 being a longer episode, in my mind, initially, when I started kind of thinking about how the series would lay out, I thought, Bill's section would be multiple episodes. And what I'm
Mm,
kind of thinking now is, because we do have confirmation to some extent that Bill's partner, which in the game, of course, we know is not alive by the time that we get to Bill, I
right.
do think that we're going to see their story fall out in real time, and then
Right.
all of Bill's story be just in episode 3, is kind of where I'm
Yeah.
thinking. I think we're going to get the entirety of them, you know, meeting up with Bill and Frank, them kind of, going out towards the school, the kind of like boss fight there, and then ultimately leaving with, Ellie and Joel getting in the car and kind of setting out for the next part of the adventure, with everything happening kind of alongside it. With Bill and his past, I think we're going to see that happen in real time, just because I feel like, you know, Nick Offerman is a fantastic actor, and I think he's going to be the real standout
Can't
star.
wait.
I think he's going to carry
Yeah.
that episode immensely. And I think we're going to get the entirety of their story in that hour and 20-ish minutes. And I'm not ready for it, dude. But I don't know. What do you think? Where do you think we're going with episode 3?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's possible that I think it's totally possible that, unlike in the game, we meet up with Bill and Frank, and Frank is alive and he's there and he's a factor.
Mhm.
But maybe the things that I don't know if I want to like should I like retroactively spoil the first game or something, but I don't know if like we meet them and then the things that happened before we got there in the game happen in real time when
Yeah.
we get there in the show.
Mhm.
Like if Frank goes off on his own and maybe that becomes the sort of mission of the show,
Right.
right? Is we need to go and figure out what happened to Frank. He left in the night or whatever, and then we find what happens to Frank. You know what I mean? And it's similar to how it is in the game, but the framing device of it is different,
Right.
which has been true of this entire show so far. And I think it would make it even more heartbreaking to see the relationship with Bill and Frank before that all goes down. You know, and
Mhm.
maybe we get flashback in there, maybe, you know, who knows, but this definitely is going to be like the Bill and Frank episode. Like I don't think there's any way it's not.
Here's my ridiculous pie in the sky kind of theory here. And like I'm gonna go a little bit like I'm not entirely convinced that this could play out, but I think this would be a really interesting way to keep the audience on their toes, and that like, you know, one of the biggest emotional sucker punches I think I have any recollection of is I think it's in the third season of Scrubs. So any like, you know,
Mm.
Scrubs fans here will know the episode that I'm referring to, and like spoilers for Scrubs, I'm sorry, but I'm going to spoil this episode from season 3,
Like
but
15-year-old show.
exactly, but the like the entirety of the episode is spent with Dr. Cox and with Brendan Fraser's character. And the entirety of the episode is spent them talking, like being together. And we had previously met Brendan Fraser's, you know, character revealed that he's very, very sick. And then this course of this
Mm.
episode is about him, you know, like getting better and stuff. And then the final moments of the episode is an emotional sucker punch when you realize he had died, and Dr. Cox was essentially like imagining him there in this scenario through the entire episode of the show, because then he basically finds out about his death and then basically goes into full denial and starts to like picture him there. So the sucker punch
Mhm.
comes with, you know, you never really see Brendan Fraser interact with the rest of the cast, but the episode presents itself as him being there and an active participant in the episode. So I'd even wonder if do we have Frank in that same capacity, possibly throughout the course of episode 3, where he never really interacts with Joel and Ellie, where we see Bill talking to him, where we see him interacting with Bill, and then maybe do they, you know, when they get back to his house, they find the note and they see that, you know, Frank's been dead the entire time, and the whole setup is that, you know,
Mm.
Bill has not dealt with it, and he's kind of like, you know, imagining him there, and that kind of final, you know, emotional
I
sucker
like
punch
that.
would be that he's been dead the entire time, and that, you know, what we've been watching is the show from Bill's perspective. Do you know what I mean? Like
I like that.
I
Yeah,
and I think
that'd be
that would be
cool.
I think that would be a really cool way to kind of deliver that without it being obvious from the jump, but also kind of again them, because I mean it's the running thing of The Last of Us. They will continue to absolutely emotionally destroy us for the foreseeable future, and I think that would be
Yeah.
a really cool way for them to do it without it being like another on-screen death, because we're going to see plenty of those, for them to kind of, you
Yeah.
know, play with the formula a little bit earlier on, and again could be a way to really make Bill's story a little bit special and a little bit different compared to what we're going to see come after. So I don't know, pie in the sky, I'd love for that to
I love
happen.
that.
I don't know if it
Yeah, I
will,
love
but
that.
yeah.
I would love to see it. I think it's a great call. And I also think, and I don't know how much they're gonna get into this before we get to Left Behind, but we're getting it's interesting. I try to put myself in the perspective of somebody who hasn't played the games, who, for example, doesn't know that Ellie is a lesbian.
Right.
And it's funny because knowing that we can pick up on little things like we got in this episode, like no, I
Yeah.
don't have a boyfriend,
Yeah.
you know, kind of thing. And we know that, but the average viewer would just write that off as like a throwaway line. And I wonder what it would be like for Ellie to maybe encounter, you know, other than her and Riley's relationship or whatever, somebody who is in a gay relationship,
Hmm.
you know, and who has had to deal with those struggles. Like I wonder if they're going to tap into that at all.
That's a
You
great
know,
point.
that it'd be kind of cool to give a little bit of like context to Ellie and sort of like grappling with her own sexuality. I don't think that should become the focal point of the episode,
Right.
but it'd be interesting to see like a little bit of that in there. So,
I'm with you, and I think that's a good point, because, you know, we can start to see hints of that. People can start to get an idea of that if she's trying to have conversations with Bill about his relationship and how things went. But
Right.
that, my dude, brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining me. This was a fantastic conversation. I love doing this with you, Seth. And,
Yes.
Court will be back next week, but I won't be here next week because I'll be off on a trip. So you'll have the Court and Seth show next week. But, Seth, if people
Yes.
wanted to see and hear more from you, where could they do so?
I'm at $2 Hero on Twitter, and of course here on Carpool Gaming.
Of course, go check out all things Seth. As for myself, you can find me on Twitter at Matt_SilverSoul, and of course on the PlayStation Drive here each and every week. Let us know in the comments, what do you think about where do you think episode 3 is going? What did you think of this episode? If you have questions, toss them into the Discord. We will answer them next week, and we will see you then. Enjoy, and we'll see you next week. Peace.